morning, everyone. My name is Murray Fulton. I am the director of the Johnson Cheyenne Graduate School of Public Policy here in Saskatoon. We are joined by video conference to our sister campus at the University of Regina. And I believe Bruno Duperon is going to be moderating things from that end. So let's see, where are they? We can wave to them. I think the best place to start this morning, and as befitting today's presentation, I want to acknowledge that we're here in Saskatoon on Treaty 6 territory, in Regina Treaty 4 territory, and of course the homeland of the Métis. And we pay our respects to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Rhett Sangster. Rhett is the Director of Reconciliation and Community Partnership, Office of the Treaty Commissioner. Rhett's going to be talking about finding your call to action, reconciliation in Saskatchewan. This is just a great time to be having this particular conversation. And Rhett, thank you so much for coming and taking the time. Just to give you a little bit of background on Rhett, Rhett works with the Office of the Treaty Commissioner, coordinating efforts to engage both the public and community leaders on the nature of reconciliation in Saskatchewan. This process aims to work with as many partners as possible to identify shared priorities and a broadly owned vision for the future. And for me, that is really a critical aspect, is finding actual ways, concrete things that various groups can do to undertake reconciliation. Just very, very quickly, Rhett said don't read all of this, but I do want to read a few of these things that Rhett's done. Because he really has really an outstanding career to date. Rhett grew up in Treaty 6 territory, specifically around Tisdale, and is a graduate of the University of Saskatchewan with a BA in political studies. He moved to Ottawa to become a foreign service officer and spent his career there working on issues of international conflict in places such as Turkey, and did some work along the Afghan and Pakistani border. He then accepted a Rotary Peace Fellowship in 2012, and then graduated in 2014 with a Master's in International Development Policy from Duke University. And then he has since returned to Saskatchewan with the Office of the Treaty Commissioner. His thesis at Duke focused on conflict prevention and reconciliation in Saskatchewan. And I think this is really an interesting sort of way of bringing all of your experience and your interests together. And we're going to hear some of that this morning. So Rhett, without any further ado, come on up. Looking forward to your talk.
Thank you very much, and I want to recognize the tobacco that I was offered here today, and I hope that this will help me to speak truth and speak with humility and connect to my ancestors as well. I've been doing this presentation lately in like sort of half an hour at a time, so I've got a bit more time, so I may ramble on it more here, and you may have to stop me, but feel free to ask questions at any time. Happy to see some friendly faces in the crowd. Jane Knox, I think I saw you over there in Regina as well. Really happy to be here. As was said, I did a master's in international public policy, so I don't think that much different than probably, haven't looked at your curriculum, but I would imagine similar type of stuff. And it's fun always to be at a university with good minds, studying good minds that are thinking about ways to make our world a better place and stuff. So I come with humility that, you know, I've had some experience and I've been able to do some work and to really dig in here in Saskatchewan, but I certainly don't have all the answers, and I certainly, I'm also looking to hear from you on what we've been doing and get some feedback and things too. So, so just a little bit about who I am. So as was said, I grew up in Tisdale. My dad was a teacher, my mom was a nurse, and we sort of moved around with my dad's career. He was director of education in Tisdale, but before that we were in Watrous, before that we were in Simpson, before that we were in Minnedosa, Manitoba. But my ancestors settled in southeast Saskatchewan. So my grandparents, one set of grandparents are buried in Redvers, but they farmed in around Walkup Manor area in southeast Saskatchewan, Treaty 2 area, I believe that is. And my other grandparents are buried in Stoughton, so Treaty 4. So both that southeast area is sort of close to my heart, in that we would always go there for Christmases and Thanksgivings and things like that. And so I still try to go as often as I can. And so I recognize that I'm here and my ancestors are here because of treaty, and that I recognize that treaty relationship was important. And part of what I'm trying to do is for my children to make it so that we can all benefit from that treaty relationship, what it was intended to be, as opposed to what it unfortunately has become in the last 150 years or so. I'll maybe just tell a little bit, again, because I've got more time, but a little bit of story about how I came to be doing this too. How did this small town white guy from Saskatchewan get working on reconciliation? So as we said, I went to school here, did my BA in political studies. 23 years old, I think I wrote the Foreign Service exam sort of on a whim. And all of a sudden I had an interview in Regina, and then all of a sudden I had a job, a big person's job in Ottawa, to move to the nation's capital and work on foreign affairs. I learned French for 10 months, and then worked for 3 years in Ottawa, then was posted in Turkey for 3 years. Came back, worked on our Afghanistan file in 2007, which was sort of right at the height of when Canada was all in on Afghanistan, and that we had 3,000 troops in Kandahar. We had 60 diplomats we had billions of dollars in aid. So we had never done anything like that internationally in the country before, and I don't know if we ever will again. So it was an exciting time to be a diplomat in Canada and to work on that. And so I got sort of lucked out. Actually, I got a job, and so I was back in Ottawa. I was supposed to do the regional file, so I was supposed to keep track of all the countries around Afghanistan, which quickly became clear that really it was Pakistan that people were most interested in. And 2 weeks into the job, they said, oh, we're going on a fact-finding mission to the Afghan border from Pakistan side. So all of a sudden I was going to Quetta, which is a city across from Kandahar, which is, I found out later, is where the Quetta Shura is, which is where Osama bin Laden and all these guys were hanging out. I didn't know that at the time, but and I took this old rickety Russian helicopter down to the border, and they actually, these Pakistani soldiers were standing there with guns, and they closed off the border, and they had this state-of-the-art iris scanning system to get border management. So again, it's the middle of nowhere. It's dirt poor in every way, but they have an iris scanner to be able to get across the border. And I think a week after putting it in, the local people had rioted because and it was another example of, I guess, of colonization. So the Afghan-Pakistani situation is that Lord Durand drew a line down the map right in the mountains between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and sort of said this is where the border is. Didn't talk to anybody locally. That's the Pashtun people lived on both sides of that line, and they've never recognized it as a border. The Afghans still don't recognize it as a border. So when we had talks about border management, we couldn't use the word border. So that was part of the discussions. We had to spend quite a bit of time about how do we talk about border management without using the B word. So so it was interesting. And then I guess Turkey was another example where my job there was to cover human rights and to go into the Kurdish areas of eastern Turkey and see another example of sort of colonization and colonialism and an attempt to assimilate a people. in that the Turks have basically, until the 90s, I think mid-90s, it was illegal to speak Kurdish. They didn't actually recognize that there was a Kurdish language. They just said it was Mountain Turkish. They just had a funny accent. And so, you know, an armed rebellion came out of that. People didn't like that, and they fought against that. And that's still going on today, and that's all related to the, you know, going into Syria and all these things. So, and then after I did the Afghanistan-Pakistan stuff, I really loved the mediation stuff, the conflict management. I found diplomacy can be a really slow process and be hard to see the fruits of your labor, but to actually see people coming together and building relationships and trust was really great. So I worked on mediation for a couple of years in Ottawa, and sort of trying to say, well, Canada should do more of this stuff internationally, more mediation type stuff. And so I go to these really cool international conferences. I remember going to one on ceasefires that had all these like grizzled veterans of like war that were like experts on how to negotiate a ceasefire in Congo and all these things. And I quickly realized I had very little to contribute to the conversation. So I thought I need to go back to school and learn some things. So that was when I started looking into grad school, and then I lucked out and got a Rotary Peace Fellowship to go spend 2 years in North Carolina, which was really tough, and to have two winters there. And again, really fantastic opportunity though to, after working for 12 years, to go back to school. And I remember having the moment sitting in like their version of the bowl in North Carolina, Duke, and sort of, I think I was reading the letters from a jailhouse or something of Martin Luther King. And thinking, like, how cool is this that I get to sit here, the sun is shining, and I get to read Martin Luther King and think about big thoughts and stuff. So anyway, I quickly realized in that time when I was looking at conflict and development in other parts of the world that I was struck by, like, God, these things are all at home too. You know, we have poverty, we have colonization, we have capacity issues, we have all governance issues, we have all these things that we're talking about in other countries, and that they all exist in my own backyard too. And in part of the peace-building world, they talk about too how traditionally what's been done is you sort of this fly-in diplomacy, and you have some high-level former Secretary of State comes in and in theory knocks heads together, and they get them all to sign a peace deal, and then they're off again. It doesn't work. But what you need to do is you need to invest in a place. You need to build a relationship. You need to build trust. You need to be there for a long time. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to do this work and I'm going to have to invest and build relationships in a country, why not do it at home again? So I had to do an internship with my first, after the first year of my master's, and I got an internship with the Office of the Treaty Commissioner. We started a bit of a dialogue process. That was kind of right in 2013 when I Don't Know More was happening. Pine House in northern Saskatchewan had just signed a $350 million deal with Cameco. There didn't seem to be anything in the middle of like either like going full-on uranium or anti-development. And we thought, well, maybe there's a way that OTC can have a discussion about what do Indigenous people want for economic development. So we pulled 17 people to Moose Jaw for the spa and had overnight discussions. And it was really good. And that became sort of my second year master's thesis, sort of looking at how do we, sort of building a little bit on the Afghan-Pakistani model where we sort of, you can do things at the political level, but what do you do when the presidents of the two countries are yelling at each other in the public and they don't like each other and they don't trust each other? So we said, okay, well, let's bring the director general level type people, the high-level bureaucrats, because they're the ones on the ground that are doing the work, and they have a lot of influence, and they have a lot of say, and they can do a lot of stuff within their systems. So similar, sort of saying, how can we bring together leaders in Saskatchewan a little bit below the political level to say, how do we have some tough conversations about where do we want to go in this province, and how do we do better in terms of delivering services and all these different things. So that's kind of how I came to be working on this stuff. And so I came back and got a job, took a leave from the federal government, and started at the OTC in 2014. And so I've been doing this ever since. So I've learned a lot. I have lots to learn, that's for sure, but it's been a really interesting ride. So a little bit about the OTC, in case you don't know. So we're a federal commission, so we're funded by the federal government, but we get our mandate from the Crown, from the federal government, and from FSIN, Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations, which is the umbrella group of 74 First Nations in Saskatchewan. And we have a sort of a two-pronged mandate. One is to look at treaty implementation, to use our body. So we're a neutral body, essentially. We're meant to be a place where the parties can come together and have some of those discussions about what does the treaty right to health mean? What does the treaty right to education mean? Does it mean free post-secondary education? Does it mean pharmaceuticals? Does it mean all these different things? So we have a treaty table that we have about 3 times a year meetings with varied results, I would say. And then the second part of our strategy is more sort of with the public and looking at relationships, the treaty relationship. So we were working back in Judge Arnott's days as the treaty commissioner in terms of building the K-12 treaties in the classroom curriculum. So I think it's next year that it'll be the first year that a graduating class, grade 12, will have gone through K-12 of treaties in the classroom. So that's exciting, that's interesting. We also do, again, public education. We have a speakers bureau where we do talks like this. We sort of try to bring people together and talk about what does a treaty relationship mean. Mm-hmm. So on reconciliation, we kind of have a 3-pronged strategy. So the first is to say, to bring together good people. And so it started in Saskatoon, Regina was shortly after that, then Lloydminster and Onion Lake. But the theory is that good people, if you can create a space where good people can come together, leaders in a given community, come together and build trust and build relationships and start to educate themselves and start to identify common priorities, that the theory is good people are going to make good things happen. So we now have 10 circles across the province where we, again, are trying to bring together First Nation, Métis, non-Indigenous, business, government, community, elders, survivors, as broad as we can get. Bring together people in different perspectives to talk about how do we improve relationships in Battleford? How do we improve the relationship in Yorkton, in Saskatoon, etc. So that's sort of strategy number 1. The second strategy is we need to know where we're going. We need to have a common vision of what success looks like. And so we've done for 5 years really now, asking people what does success look like? What is if we get this right in a generation or 2? I mean, I think it's probably a couple generational type of work, but if we get this right, what does it look like? And then maybe we can start to work backwards a little bit. So we've been asking people on that, and I'll get into that. And then the third part is how do we measure progress against that vision? So if we know where we're going, how do we build a framework so that organization X or Y can see themselves and can start to work in that. Collective impact is a big part of sort of the theory around this. So Kathy from Battleford, who's joined me here, knows this, and that's part of why they came together in Battleford, was that they went to a Tamarack Institute conference and talked about collective impact. But it's similar to this idea that complex issues can't be solved by any one level of government or business or anybody, but we need a diversity of views. We need a common agenda. We need shared measurement. We need everybody to kind of mutually reinforcing activities, means basically whatever you do best, do it. But continually communicate with each other. And then backbone support is sort of what the OTC is trying to sort of do, is to kind of keep everybody moving in the same direction. So again, these coalitions of champions, this is the Heart of Treaty 6 group in Lloydminster. So that includes Lloydminster, Poundmaker, Onion Lake First Nation, and Frog Lake First Nation. And so this, in I think it was April 2017, we signed a declaration. Again, we worked together of saying what are our common objectives, how do we work together, sort of principles on how we work, and we signed a declaration. But a lot of what we try to do is to build trust, build relationships, find common objectives. It's always the challenge is finding the right balance between leaders who want to do and want to get into the action and want to get moving, and the need to build the relationships and the trust. Because I don't think you can get to the action without really educating yourself and knowing why we are where we are. So it's doing that little dance, I guess, a little bit between action and relationships and trying to do them both at the same time. And again, the idea is sort of, it's a bit of an incubator for ideas, it's a bit of support for each other. All these groups are doing, all the people in the groups are doing stuff in their own organizations, but this is hard work, and sometimes there's bad days, and so we need to have some people to lean on every once in a while and just vent or whatever type thing. So there's a circle. Saskatoon, Regina, part of Treaty 6. Prairie Rivers is north of Saskatoon, Warman, Martinsville, One Arrow, Osler, Aberdeen, there's a whole list of them. Yorkton, Battleford, Prince Albert, Nipawin, Cumberland House, Swift Current, and there's many other regions. So I was just actually in Broadview yesterday. There's a group there that has been starting to meet on their own. Kakawishtahow, Cowassis, Carry the Kettle. There's a group in Kamsack that talked to us about potentially seeing if we can come and work with them. My challenge is, unfortunately, just capacity. I'd love to be everywhere all the time for everybody, but I'm getting back issues from driving my car, actually. So again, this is the idea of why are we doing this? We're trying to build trust. And so, yeah, so this is who's been there. The advice, and we always try to work, is to include residential school survivors, 60 school survivors, knowledge keepers. It's meant to be trying to do things in a new way. So reconciliation is trying to bring the Indigenous worldview and the Western worldview together and finding new ways of doing things. So every group's a little different, and we struggle and different things, but I think it's been interesting to see how we do it. And you can see that there's been a lot of groups that have come along. Some of the things we've done, so these are photos here from the Rock Your Roots Walk for Reconciliation in Saskatoon. I think it's 4 times we've done that now. I think the last one had about 5,000 people come out for National Indigenous Peoples Day. That's what it's called now. June 21st, if you haven't been, you should come. It's a great day. If you need a fill-up of the heart day, that's a good day for sure to see people walking together and working together and sharing and stuff. So some of the other things, so we had Senator Mary Sinclair come to Lloydminster for a gala. We did Warman and Martinsville. That group has done now full day sort of Indigenous relations sessions there. We've done anti-racism training to Battleford and Prince Albert. Elders teach. A lot of the groups, we try to have a cultural teaching. So if we meet for 2 or 3 hours, we usually start with an elder talking about the 7 sacred teachings, or talking about tobacco, talking about smudging, these different things. We try to bring in a cultural element. Blanket exercise in Yellow Quill in Yorkton, that was a great experience. And that, Yellow Quill is so, to see the farmers, like total stereotypical farmers from the RM with suspenders and dirty shirt, and come and do a blanket exercise alongside an elder from Yellow Quill, and then we did a tour of the school in Yellow Quill. We saw their new ambulance, I think a lot of these people, these guys would say, I farmed right there, but I've never been on the reserve, and so, this is complicated work, but it's simple in many ways. We need to know each other. We need to learn to get to know each other. We're people. And so that's sort of what we try to do. Poverty simulation, flag raising. This is one that I think was interesting. In the wake of the Gerald Stanley verdict, we had sharing circles in 3 of our circles there. So in Saskatoon, in Regina, and in part of Treaty 6, those were the only 3 that were around at that point. We worked with elders, and we had a sharing circle and got people to be able to vent and share their feelings and their anger and their sorrow, and just to, again, try to sort of say that, we're all in this together, and we were all hurting, and so those are the types of things we can do. Before I get into strategy 2, I've been talking a while, any questions on that? it's fun. I really like that part of the job because you get to see people kind of make connections and break down walls, and it's fun to see people make connections. I remember the first Reconciliation Saskatoon meetings. I remember we were there, and there's about 20 of us there at the point, and somebody make a joke, and kind of everybody look at each other like, am I allowed to laugh at that joke or not? I'm not sure. And now, you know, we get together monthly, we have food together, there's lots of laughter, the relationships there, and there's lots of spin-offs from those relationships, I hope and I think. So the second strategy is to say, okay, what's success look like? What's that North Star that we're all going for? And so we've been asking for 3 years sort of these questions. Where do we want to go? How do we get there? And how will we know we've gotten there? And we often do this exercise, and maybe I'm going to let you do it just for 2 minutes. So this is an exercise we've done to collect our data. So I'm going to ask everybody to close their eyes for a minute. And I want you guys to imagine yourselves 25 years from now. Okay, so do the math in your head. How old are you? Imagine yourself, you're a little bit rounder around the middle, you got a little more gray hair, but you're an elder of sorts. You're someone, and you're talking to a young person. You're sitting around a campfire. You're at a lake or some special place that exists to you. Imagine yourself wherever you like to go to connect to the land. And you're sitting there with a young person, a grandchild or a young nephew or niece, and you're telling stories. And you're saying about how, 25 years ago, 2019, things started to change. And 25 years from now, things are different. So what is the story that you're telling that young person? What's changed to be successful? And second of all, what was your own role in that change? What did you do? What are you bragging about to that young person about what you did to bring about that change? So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to just sit in silence and think about that for a minute. Does anybody want to share any of the thoughts they had? What story were you telling? What has changed in your story? What are some of the stories you're telling about the young person? There's no wrong answers here. Regina, you're welcome to speak too. I'm going to call on somebody.
Yeah.
Kathy?
You have somebody from Regina.
Okay. Jane, yes.
Okay, hi Rhett. It's good to be here. I started my reconciliation journey in 2016, and I have been working at it. My husband would say maybe too hard. But when you ask that question, in 25 years, what will I say? Well, to some extent, I will say I spent the first 3 years working really hard to learn because I was so ignorant and still am. And there's so much to learn. And then, I tried hard to move myself quickly to a space of sharing with others what I'm learning. So I did some writing in 2016, and I continued to do that, make presentations, that kind of thing. But it's really very little. It just feels like not enough. As a Unitarian, as a fellowship, we work hard to inform ourselves. We have a library. We have a big bulletin board that we, update. We have a tab on our website for reconciliation, and that's a big job. If anybody needs, a little extra work, we'd love to have help to keep that up to date because there's so much, to add. But it feels like not enough. How do you do anything that really makes a difference?
Okay, thank you. I mean, it's a common frustration that I think all of us working on this stuff feel, and sometimes that things aren't moving quick enough. But I think one of the things you're talking about is learning and understanding more of the history and things like that. So, okay. Anybody else? Yeah. So go ahead.
All right. So I think part of the problem with this is that we tend to treat reconciliation as its own thing, and Indigenous issues as being sort of this bubble that we label Indigenous issues, right? But they're not. We have to consider these topics as part of every policy that we're dealing with, speaking from the policy space. And that includes always asking questions, what is the role of treaty in this policy? How is this going to interact? What are the effects of this going to be in everything? And, I'm a student here at the policy school, and I think part of that could be is we need to start doing that more in our classes. And it's starting to get into the curriculum and the material that we cover, but it could be more. Right? So we need to get used to asking these questions about everything all the time.
So if you're in 25 years, that will be included in all the policy.
Yeah.
That's what Shoyama will have treaty integrated into all their courses and all the policies. That's great. Anybody else?
I guess for me, when I think about, it's just kind of building, I guess, on what he was saying too. I think of the treaties as setting out a holistic relationship amongst people, like where we all have a role and we all belong. But also, it's about the interconnectedness and the interrelationships that we have also, not only with each other, but with the land. And so I think that, in 25 years, I'd like to see us all just, I think, living more in harmony, not only with each other, but also with the land. And I think for me, when I think about the treaties, I see that as, the ultimate treaty vision is how do we live together in harmony on the land and with the land.
So harmony, relationships with the land and with each other, and living. Anybody else?
Regina.
Oh, it's Regina. Okay, sure. We better go back and forth. We don't want to
Okay, thank you.
get accused of being pro Saskatoon versus pro Regina.
Yes.
Good morning, I'm Gail. I'm new to Regina and new to Saskatchewan. So when I moved here 2 years ago, there was a lot of things happened all of a sudden, and it was like culture shock, even though I was from Alberta, and a lot of similarity in our histories. But what I would like to see, I'd be 94 years old in 25 years, and I'm thinking, okay, what would I like to see? I would like to see it be absolutely unremarkable when you walk into any business or walking down the street and all the cultures are just there unremarkably. Like it's just a normal thing to see people in banking, in business positions that are from all different cultures, and there's nothing remarkable about it. We don't need to have special programs to make sure those people can be in those positions. And I have started a small project of my own that I'm hoping will go ahead. It's just days old, so I don't want to say what it is yet, but I'm hoping I will be able to say that I did one thing specifically about reconciliation for me as being a treaty person whose parents were on the immigrant side, the newcomer side. And I'd like to be able to say that I taught my kids and my grandkids and had conversations with my friends and saw all of us evolving in our attitudes, because it's really easy for me to suddenly understand in the middle of a conversation that, hey, wait a minute, that's a pretty colonialist attitude, and I didn't think I had one because ever since I was a kid, there's been things I thought were not right. But I still get caught discovering that I really need to rethink how I'm thinking about some things. So I'm very appreciative of having places like this where I can discuss things with people who are open to new ideas, and I'm not kind of beating my head against the wall trying to find some way to talk to the people that I know already. So thank you very much.
I think from that sort of representative workforces and sort of representative cultures sort of in all that we do, sort of being remarkable because it's just sort of mainstream. So, sounds good.
So thank you so much for bringing this issue. I'm also Indigenous from my back home. So we have been working for reconciliation last 10 years. When I came in Saskatchewan in 2010, I was so excited to see the progress of decolonization, anti-racism, and Indigenous land rights. And I was actively involved in the Ideal No More movement. So what so far I have seen last 10 years when I was so excited, but after this election, and also some of the critical discussion, while I was very excited about this issue, somehow I'm kind of feeling the same kind of challenges. How far we can go when we are thinking about 25 years ago. After 25 years. When I started last 10 years, how far I came through last 10 years. Maybe personal life, I was teaching my kids, okay, this is the way we can teach, and also other fables. But I was wondering, reconciliation is not even, it's a process. But in this process, we can see the progress as we go. But for me, as a newcomer here, kind of challenges this question, actually, how far we are making progress, and how we can see it in our everyday practice. So this is one of the challenging issues for me to understanding this for next 25 years.
Well, I'll get into how we are trying to potentially look at how we get it first, but it's a challenge for sure. Any of us want to, one more from Regina? Any more?
No, I think we're good. Thank you.
I told my grandkids that we had that systemic racism was a thing, and we've got a reduction in divisive speaking, especially 2019. We got an increase in that divisive talk, and people didn't know each other. My part in that was educating people about each other, connecting people. That was my role. We also carried our cell phones in our hands.
Well, what do we do now?
They'll be in our minds.
Siri's just the left half of your brain. Okay, well, thank you for that. That's great feedback. So we've been doing this or a version of this for 4 or 5 years, and trying to, usually I get people to write things down, and we collect their pieces of paper, and we captured it and tried to, this is probably version draft 757 or something like that, but this is where we're at now. This is what we've released publicly. We've taken the draft off it as of September. We had a pipe ceremony to release it, and and I should say as well, we've tried to instill ceremony in this as well in this process all the way along. So we've had pipe ceremonies, and we've got cloth, and we've got sweats and things like that. So, but this is what we think people in Saskatchewan have said successful. So 4 elements, all of which have different bullets under it. But reconciliation is about understanding our history. So I think we've heard some of that in terms of Jamie was talking about learning more. It's about having authentic relationships. So I think that's some of the things you were talking about, getting to know each other. It means having strong cultures, vibrant cultures that are strong into themselves, but are also sharing space and learning from each other. And then the systems. So systemic racism, someone mentioned, how do we, policy stuff, how do we get it so that our systems, education, justice, politics, economics, that they benefit everybody equally. Screwed up which way I'm going. Some of the more details, so shared understanding of our history is we understand and honor the history of this land, including past and present wrongs. So this is the residential schools, the 60 schools, all these different policies. We have respectful relationships with our ancestors and with the land, which I think gets at some of the context you were saying about the connection with the land. We've heard that quite a bit as well, and connecting with our ancestors. And I get, from my perspective as a non-Indigenous person too, some of the teachings we've had from elders is that, residential or Indigenous people have lost connections to ancestors through residential school, 60 scoop, all the Indian Act, all the policies. And I'm not trying to equate them in any way, but at the same time, non-Indigenous people also have lost the link to their ancestors. People don't speak Ukrainian as much anymore. People don't speak German. My grandmother spoke Flemish. I don't have any having really linked to that. And that always strikes me a little bit when we do our Rock Your Roots walk. Because everyone's supposed to sort of rock your roots and represent who you are. And I was like, I'm English, Scottish, German, and Flemish. And I don't really identify that much with any of them per se. So what do I? So in some ways I feel a bit of a loss there. And so I think some of the advice we've had is that all of us need to reconnect those ancestors and those cultures. And then healing. We hear a lot about individuals, families, communities, nations are strong in healing. Again, from these past policies that were around. Relationships. Well, so that means we need to have trust. We need to have partnerships. We need to work together. And we need to have better skills for communicating and for conflict management. Vibrant cultures and worldviews means that, again, our worldviews and our languages are strong, and vibrant, and reused, but that we also have spaces, common spaces that we build where those worldviews come together and they learn from each other and they understand each other. We share common civil spaces. Then the systems. So, quality of life, and all systems reject racism, systemic racism. Representative leadership and workforce. Heard some of that. And, again, treaty promises, Indigenous sovereignty, self-determination. We need to figure out what that means and how do we move forward on those sorts of things. So that's where we are in terms of the vision. That's what we've been doing. We just released it publicly, so we've had some good feedback so far in terms of people seeing themselves in it, and that's the idea, is that hopefully everyone can see themselves in it, and hopefully we can all start to working in whatever way we do it towards the vision that tries to get back to the treaty relationship, the spirit of intent. Any questions on that before I get into strategy treaty? Okay. Any
Rhett, one of the ones that troubles me personally the most is the systems that benefit us all. You talk about 25 years, it looks like that's not going to be enough. Like, what can we do to, I want bigger than firecrackers, and I'm not banging on the table, waving the street sort of person, but I just want to move on. These systems are in such bad shape, not just one, but all. Like, how do we get through that? It seems like politics isn't going to help us, and I don't really believe in, rebellion. What do we do?
Policy wonks, a bunch of them here that could tell you, but I think the system stuff is the hardest work for sure. It's the it's the longer term. In some ways I say that, but also I think there are ways that we can right away just look at in any of our organizations and how do we hire and retain people. I was just at a thing with the corporate sector that was talking about procurement. How do we make it so that there were actually Ken Coates apparently, John Saskatchewan, still with you guys or not? But it talks about procurement being king, and so how do we? So Sask Power talks about how they give 2.5% on their weighting to a 51% owned Indigenous company, and then another 2.5% to some sort of level on Indigenous workforce. So those are ways that systems can start to change. There's lots of work to be done, but I think it's about really looking at our own self and building those relationships and ask people and ask advice. I'll get into, again, I think some of our measurement stuff starts to get some of that stuff too, so I'll maybe kick the ball a little bit down the football field to get at that, but there's lots to be done. So I'll segues well into strategy 3. So how do we measure progress? And so we've been now, because we want to inspire action, we want all of you to go out there and look at your organizations and say, how am I going to do something? And we want to inspire accountability. So there's always two sides that we want the people that want to wave their finger and say, look, you guys got to do this and hold people accountable. But I also think we need to inspire learning because we're going to make mistakes on this stuff, and people we need to let people take chances and try new things and make mistakes and hopefully learn from them. So that's part of what we hope our evaluation framework can kind of do. You know, how do we know if our efforts are making a difference? I talked a little bit about ceremony, how we try to instill our intentions and spirit. And again, we've really tried to have voices of survivors and knowledge keepers throughout, and really root our work in calls to action and under calls for justice and all these sort of foundational documents. So there's sort of 4 tools that I'll talk a little bit about we've been developing around measurement. So the first one is that we did a telephone survey. Actually, the Social Science Research Lab here at the U of S conducted it for us, and so it was in December and January last year, January 2019, where we interviewed 3,000 residents across the province of Saskatchewan, and we oversampled in 7 communities where we are doing work too, so we have sort of regional data as well. And there's a long link to where you can find that, but it gives us a bit of a baseline of where we're at in terms of attitudes on reconciliation. So just, I'm going to go through this relatively quickly because I talk a lot about it, but we asked people about understanding our history. So you see that 33% people were very familiar with residential schools in Canada. It goes down to 24% when they asked about familiarity with reconciliation of the concept, and only 11% said they were very familiar with the TRC and the calls to action. So that's an interesting finding, I think, from us. We asked about relationships. How do you find the current relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people? More people saw it as somewhat or very negative than positive. But on the more positive side, most people saw it as improving, somewhat or strongly agreed that the relationship is improving. This is the one I always talk about giving me hope. I'm like the last half full for the guy, so I like look for these ones all the time. 90%, I think it was. It's roughly about 90% of people said that reconciliation is important. And about, I think, 87% said that it's possible. So they had hope that it could happen. So to me, those are encouraging. We asked about systems. Do our systems represent and benefit us all equally? We got about a 2/3, 1/3 split. So 2/3 of people disagree that our systems benefit everyone equally, but about a third think our systems work just fine. So again, interesting, and again, you can look at that a number of ways, but I like to think of that, okay, there's 2/3 of the people that see a problem and that will work with us to make change. We asked about racism. How racist do you think the average Saskatchewan person is in Saskatchewan? And 90% recognize some level of racism, 2 or higher. So 1 being no racism, 5 being very racist. Most said 3. So again, you can look at that a number of ways, but I think I would be more worried if people didn't see racism in Saskatchewan. So there is, again, acknowledgement that we have some issues to work on. So that's, any questions maybe on that, on the survey first before we move on? Yeah.
I just wanted to ask a quick question. I was curious about the response to our reconciliation and racism.
Yeah.
Did you get a sense of what people understand reconciliation?
That's a good question. We did provide a definition. Don't ask me what it was right now, but we did provide a definition. But I think on a lot of this stuff, you can say, how are people understanding?
Or do they understand? You know, like, do they feel they have a good understanding?
Yeah, I don't know that, to be honest. And I'm not a survey expert or evaluation expert by any means, but there are, from my understanding, there are holes you can punch in most of these things. But and I think that is one for sure. Any other questions?
What were your demographics of the survey? Indigenous, non-Indigenous?
Yeah, it was pretty representative of Saskatchewan. So I think it was 17% Indigenous. So I think it was 12 or 13 First Nation and 6 or 7 Métis. So which is pretty representative of Saskatchewan's demographics right now. It's generally older, so it's 55 plus and older answer their phones more readily for these types of surveys. So we're definitely skewed to older. Men and women, I think, were pretty even. And again, it was pretty well spread across the province. I do, in the survey, so I didn't bring any copies of it, but if you look on the website, and I think I'm sharing this PowerPoint here today, you can find it. And there's actually two versions of the survey. So there's one that has sort of the main findings, and then there's a second one that gets into a little bit more of the demographic breakdown and some of the differences, First Nation, Métis, this kind of thing. So it was quite a process, this, in terms of trying to pull all this data together and make sense of it and stuff. So, yeah. Any other questions on that?
How do you select the participant?
Sorry?
How do you select the participant for food club?
It was random calls. I think SSRL here supplies telephone lists from the phone companies, and they do random calls. So it's supposed to be a relatively random sample with some, of course, challenge. John, any questions? No? Okay, move on. This is the second tool we've developed, is a bit of a mapping exercise, and this is actually one of our low-tech examples. We now have it in print, I think. We did it at Yorkton. The principal from the Melville High School was making fun of us because this was literally it was the fan, the circle on the fans. We took the fan and we're drawing circles with that. But the idea is that we wanted to create an exercise for people to say, where are we at now? And so we do this process where groups, so that's the Reconciliation Saskatchewan group did it, but we did it in Battleford, we did it in Yorkton, we've done it with the Health Authority, we've done it with Cancer Society, we've done it with a number of organizations now, to say, put yourself on a sticky and put yourself on the Venn diagram there. Where are you? If you're doing all four areas, then you're in the middle. If you're only working on relationships, you're on the one side, this kind of thing. And then we got them to say, well, justify it. So in each corner, they would write, what are you doing to build better relationships? What are you doing to build better systems, etc. And then they, after doing all that, then they would move themselves with the stickies to maybe rethink it again and then draw lines to where they were. So it's a messy process, but and we're sort of still working on it, but it does give us some information. For example, we ask for people's postal codes, and so we're able to literally map where the activity is. So this is the Battleford Map, so you can see, interesting that pretty well all the activities in the North Battleford side as opposed to the Battleford side. Whether that means that, what that means, I don't know, or maybe that just means all the organizations are set up there, but it's an interesting take. This again is sort of saying on shared understanding of our history, according to, I forget now which one this was, but most people were working on blanket exercises or acknowledging treaty territories was the biggest activity people were doing. There was somewhat capacity building, but I guess again, all this stuff we're trying to figure out, what do we do with all this data? How do we take best advantage of it and make sense of it? But this is the way we've been trying to so far. And so we try to give this back to the groups, and again, as a way of getting discussions going. So this is the third tool, is indicators. So Annie Métis and Michael Heimlich have been working with us, and they've been reading diligently through the calls to action, through the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, calls for justice, through the UNDRIP, through UN Sustainable Development Goals, through the UN Rights of the Child, et cetera, to say what are the indicators that are out there in these fundamental documents that would be able to measure these 4 elements of division. So they have, I think, a 70 or 80 page document now of things, and I'm actually going to show you. So this is actually, again, this is one I did this presentation for corporate group recently, so I tried to pull out some of the indicators from a business perspective. So for example, call to action 92, the first one, percentage of Indigenous employees in management positions. Number of organizations with an Indigenous recruitment strategy. Number of Indigenous entrepreneurs in Saskatchewan, from the Sustainable Development Goals. Missing and murdered Indigenous women, number of organizations completing equity, diversity, and inclusion reports in all business proposals. So those are the kinds of things that we've pulled out. And I'm going to just show you our Prezi. Oh, no, here. Can you see that in Regina? This thing? Reconciliation indicators? So we've done this now as a way of presenting it, but so if we click on authentic relationships, theory, it should work. Okay, so the 2 bullets that are under there talk about strong relationships, trust existing among people, and greater skills for communicating. So then you look under that, then they've identified 3 types of outcomes. So capacity change outcomes are the ones about educating ourselves, building knowledge, which then hopefully leads to behavior outcomes. So if we have greater knowledge, we do things differently. And then if all of us start doing things differently, then we get to societal outcomes. And so that's the way they've grouped it. And then under each of these, there are indicators. So increased acknowledgement of past wrongdoings. Here are some of the indicators. Number of church parties employees trained on Indigenous people's rights to self-determination and spiritual matters, called Action 60. So that's an example. Number of church parties and other faith groups in Saskatchewan adopting UNDRIP as a framework for reconciliation. So those we have all this for each of the outcomes and each of the indicators. So just to give you that example of where we are, it's very much a work in progress. So anyway, so that's, you see that now? So indicators that's part of the work we've been doing. And then evaluators love logic models, I'm learning. So, what we did then is so our process was to identify the indicators and the outcomes through that process. And then throw that up on the wall and sort of play with it and come up with this very messy version of a logic model. So, and again, this is a draft that's changed now, but so this is the idea is that we want, so this up here is your behavior or your capacity change. So these are the education where you're learning about various things. Then you're getting into behavioral change here, and then getting into the societal change. And you'll notice that a lot of the red, which is the system stuff, get into your comment about, Jane, about systems, is over in this side, which I think sort of goes to the point that that's some of the long-term work, and that we're not going to get our systems changed tomorrow. But that's where we're at. We've also then, Annie's also been working to kind of make it into a more of a sort of holistic imagery. I don't have this, she just did this yesterday, so didn't have time to put it on the slide, but sort of a tree with the roots being the capacity, the trunk being sort of the behavioral change, and the leaves being the societal changes. So we're trying to look at it, the Western view loves the linear process of the logic model. The Indigenous perspective is much more circular, and so we're trying to appeal and learn from both, and so that's where we're at now. So those are our 4 elements of the measurement strategy. What we want to do now, going forward, is to, in terms of the circles, we want to get them sustainable and help work with them so that I don't have to go to every meeting in Yorkton, and so that those because to be successful, I mean, I think one of the things I learned from my public policy degree is that the more local the solution is, the more built on local capacities and strengths, the stronger it is, the better it is, the more likely it's going to succeed. And so we want these to be locally led and locally run. But they need some funding, and we don't have much money. So we're doing this on the cheap. There's been other circles that we're trying to get going to. I can't say no, so I go to Kakawistahau, and even though I have no time for it. But and then we also want the groups to be learning together. So we've had now the coordinators come together 3 or 4 times, where they can share experiences and learn from what's happening in Yorkton, from Lloydminster, from PA, etc. And then strategy 2 and 3. So I would love to have. My dream is that logic model, we have a pathway and a sort of facilitative process where we could go to Johnson Shoreham School or Saskatchewan Health Authority or Mom and Pop's plumbing group and work with you to say, with the mapping, where are you now? And okay, that's on the logic model, that puts you here, here, and here. Okay, so what's your plan for the next year? What's your plan for the next 5 years? What's your plan for the next 10 years, however you want to do it? And then we have indicators for you that will help you, guide you. I would love to build and connect to the many curriculums and tools that are already out there, so that help you to get there. And then you have a reconciliation action plan that you can report back on every year, and we can collect that data with you, and we can learn with you and move forward. So that's the long-term plan. The challenge, to be honest, is funding and partnerships. And so, in fact, I'm going to Ottawa next week, and partly to sort of look for some funding. We need some long-term, multi-year. We need some people and some salaries and some people we need an evaluation team. And we need to connect with partners like you guys, like Johnson Cheyenne. I often think universities, you've got your army and grad students and you've got all this data that would be fantastic for people to dig into and learn from and stuff. So again, we're kind of still making this up a little bit as we go along, but that's where we're at, and that's where we see sort of, I guess, the reconciliation in Saskatchewan and where it moves forward. So that's also, any questions?
For reconciliation circles for the province, has there been much post-secondary involvement? I'm sure there's Erickson, Chris Saxon, involved in reconciliation, Saskatchewan, and probably others from the U of S, but is there more of a need there, do you think, or?
We would certainly welcome it, for sure. There's a lot of community colleges, like the one in Mr. Skating area. But so the community colleges, I think, or I would say we're more involved maybe than the universities right now. Saskatchewan, of course, is the U of S. U are, Regina, I think they're there too. But it certainly would be welcome. I think PA, I'm not sure if the campus in PA has been with those meetings or not.
Combining your strong international background with your Indigenous understanding, I'm wondering what impact you think the UNDRIP might have on the reconciliation process. Canada's been somewhat reticent about accepting UNDRIP, but you know.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And I'm not an expert on UN Declaration of Religious Peoples either, but you know, there is a movement to have that streamlined into all of our policies, and that potentially could be a huge change. The biggest one in there is FPIC. That's the Free and Prior Informed Consent. So that's the one. That's why Canada didn't want to sign it for years, because some argue, and I don't. You know, I just had something the other day where it doesn't say, FPIC does not say that there's a veto for Indigenous people for development, but it certainly raises the bar in terms of if you were to do business in an Indigenous territory, that you need to consult and partner and work with Indigenous people of that group or of that territory to move forward. And so I think that's from a straight business perspective, there's costs involved now, right? So, and that time. And so, you know, they don't necessarily want that. But so that's potentially a game changer, a real paradigm shift in terms of, and I think what we're seeing through the courts and stuff like that is that jurisdiction, especially provincial jurisdiction, is being challenged. And that First Nation, that jurisdiction is going from the province to the First Nations, and so I think some of the provinces are starting to play some of that as well. But I mean, their only way to go ahead is to partner and to work together on this stuff. I don't think, you know, fingers, heels in and fighting about it is going to help. So, but I don't know how that's going to all happen. It's going to be very interesting.
Is there anybody in Regina?
Any questions?
Bruno?
Yeah, yes. Is there any question here? A comment?
Did I answer your question, Jane?
Well, no. The thing is, we need more urgency around this. I'm really sad to hear the Office of the Treaty Commissioner say that it's okay to push the systems to sort of later. I'm old enough to know that later doesn't come. You know, all my whole career, I heard people say, oh, well, that's a federal problem because, you know, it's Indigenous, so nothing to do with us. We're provincial. And the feds say the same damn thing. We have to stop this. And you folks are the policy people, right? Now, isn't that true? Some of you must be policy. I mean, that's where we are. Here is Johnson Choyama. You have to, and I have to some extent already. I make this a priority in my life. Right after my health and my family. We have to get serious about this. In Saskatchewan, we are still walking into hospitals and taking babies away from mothers in the first week that they're born. No chance. We don't even call grandma or auntie or anybody to say, look, this mom's going to need some support. What can you rev up with the family? We don't do that. We just take that kid. We have a policy that allows us to do that. In Saskatchewan this year, this week, this is going on. What are we doing about this? This is not a time to be saying, well, we'll get to that someday. Like, I'm sorry, I was in the workforce starting in 1970, and this has not changed. So, okay, that's my fault. I tried, I did. I could give you a list, but not good enough. So trying is not enough. We have to move. We have to make changes. And it has to start with the policies. Because if our policy people are not smart enough to get on and find ways to make this real, then talking to grandma and grandpa and the kids and the lady next door is not going to change a thing. And you're still going to see racism in the streets because it's condoned, encouraged, and enforced by our government. This has to stop. And you folks here at Johnson Choyama, you're responsible to make sure that every student that leaves this place knows how to make that work and starts influencing government decisions the day they're out the door or before. Get on with it. I'm doing my best. Come on.
Thank you very much. So can I add a little thing? It's a follow-up question to what you said earlier and also the question on UNDRIP. And while you were doing this exercise and we had to project ourselves 25 years from now, I was saying, well, very positive and constructive things to my kids and perhaps grandkids. But at the same time, I was thinking about the UNDRIP and saying, 25 years ago, British Columbia passed the UNDRIP into law, into legislation. And here in Saskatchewan, we're not there yet. So that will be your job, 25 years after BC, to continue the fight. So I hope I will be wrong. I hope that Saskatchewan will follow the BC example soon, but I have some doubts.
Maybe I'll just respond, Jay. I didn't mean to, and thank you for pointing that out, because I didn't mean to say that the system stuff can wait by any means. That's not what and you're right, there are things that can be done tomorrow in all of our systems. I think just in looking at a logic model, those are some of the harder stuff. I'm not saying that we need to wait by any means, but you're right. Systemic change is absolutely needed, and we've got to get at it. And people are dying in our system, so there needs to be a lot of urgency.
Mine's more of just maybe a comment. Thank you for sharing. Thanks, Rhett, for your presentation. just kind of sitting here thinking, I'm very often the quiet one, so I just had a lot of thoughts, starting with kind of the exercise that we went through and your conversations around collective action, and then Jane's comments, recent comments right now, working in municipal government, in policy. We do have that opportunity right now, and I do think that we are making these small, tiny, teeny steps every day to get there and bring other people along with us. And I think that's what's really important. So when I go back to the exercise you had us do, it was actually quite overwhelming for me because of the day I live in terms of my 8 hours at work or so on. It can be extremely overwhelming thinking about what is reconciliation, how do we perpetuate reconciliation forward, and that's tough, especially thinking about talking to my kids in the future. But I think it is those little things that we do, and it does come down to that collective action. So I mean, we work with OTC on some of our policy reviews that we're doing right now to make sure that we're changing the lens that we're looking at them through and developing them through. So it's those little teeny steps that all just kind of layer on top that will make that larger collective action change. But we have to not only make sure that we're all doing that, but also bringing people with us. So telling that story, and I think that that's kind of these strategies that you're talking about. I think that's where they're really great because these circles become bigger and bigger and bigger. So when like Reconciliation Saskatoon started, it had a smaller reach, and now it's got this huge reach, and that's what's really going to make those big differences. So when we do come through with a new policy that does have this lens applied to it, it's just automatically accepted. We don't have to debate that. So me in my daily life, I'm still in that debate mode or defend mode or whatever it might be sometimes. But I think the farther we get along, it will be easier. So, I appreciate this, and I appreciate the work that OTC is doing to do that. Yeah, I guess this is just more of a comment, I guess. And I guess for me, I kind of feel like in terms of the strategy, maybe I guess I'm just a little bit unimpressed with, again, like the focus on, making systems benefit us all, because what I see is tinkering with systems rather than addressing what's actually irreconcilable about systems in terms of why they're not benefiting us all. So for example, if we take the justice system, right now, like 81% of the inmates are Indigenous, right? And so you could say, okay, well, we need more Indigenous judges because out of the 101 judges in Saskatchewan, only 2 are Indigenous. But then if you talk to people like Harold Johnson, who spent, 25 years working within the justice system as a prosecutor and as defense counsel and as a judge, he'll say this system is broken and it needs to be fundamentally changed in order for it to benefit everybody. And what you need is, restorative justice. Because right now the punitive justice system is not working, and then when you layer on poverty and structural factors and racism and all that sort of thing, it's just basically, we're funneling Indigenous people into this system, and that's how supposedly we're going to restore and achieve reconciliation. And so I guess for me, I'm just like, yeah, when are we going to actually create a groundswell of coalitions and reconciliation circles that are actually going to address the structural change that needs to happen, rather than just tinkering with systems?
Yeah, good points. I agree with you. There are elements of the system that need to be torn right down and rebuilt, and justice is a good example, I think. One of the elements of the vision is around Indigenous sovereignty and treaty rights. So I certainly think self-government, self-determination, sovereignty needs to be part of the solution. I sort of see that there's got to be, Indigenous people need to build their own systems that work for them, and there's probably going to be also some overlap with the mainstream system as well. I don't think we can probably totally disaggregate ourselves. And so how do we do both of that, I guess? And I don't think anybody has that answer, but I think part of what we in the OTC wants to do, like I would love to have a justice system reconciliation circle where we bring together the top minds in the justice system to say, like, what's wrong and how do we fix it, and that's how so take your hats off, whether you're judge or prosecutor or whatever, and let's just talk about how do we do this better, and do it in a way that, I don't have the answers, but I think I don't think anybody has the answers. I think we need to have all the perspectives of good people together to talk about how we do it. And I think you're right, sometimes it's going to be burn it down and start again. So I don't know. I don't have the answers. I think the systems one is the toughest one, and that's what Jay's talking about too. I'm not saying that we got to get to it for sure, and it's the ones that are affecting people's lives daily. So so we struggle with this, like Andy Métis, who works in my office, is always sort of say, well, sure, we can build trust and relationships as much as we want, but it's not going to change things for the kid on the street or something like that. So, and I think she's right. But I think also that we need to get the body politic to be on board and build the relationships and the trust so that when we make the changes that are needed, that they're supported broadly across society too. So I think it's a two-pronged strategy a little bit, but I agree with you.
Building on that, has there been any discussions on these reconciliation circles on doing something more action orientated in subcommittees? Because like you said, the Saskatchewan Reconciliation Committee is now 100 organizations. I'm sure they're all there for very different reasons. Is there an opportunity to start breaking them off into more specific areas, like a corporate one that's very focused on, going after those, corporate mandates, if you will, and then one that is more justice focused and one that is more social focused?
We're doing a bit of a internal sort of planning process right now to sort of say how do we, we're 3 or 4 years old now, and how do we get to the action for it? And that's been some of the messages of elders and survivors is like, no more baby steps, let's get moving. And I don't feel as co-chair of Reconciliation Saskatoon that we're using that energy and that knowledge as well as we could be, that's for sure. So but I don't know how. So what we're doing is actually working now we hired a consultant to sort of facilitate to have some of these discussions as a group to say what do we see ourselves in 4 years, and how do we get to some of those more discussions, and how do we use our talent more in a better way and stuff. So come to those meetings and give your input, sure. Time for one more question.
As an organization, how do you see the last 10 years progress, and what are the vision for the next 25 years?
How do we see
the progress of the last 10 years, and what do you see as your organization next 25 years?
Our organization or
and as your organization?
I would love to see us continuing what we're doing, but I would love to see us have 25 reconciliation circles across the province with lots of staff that could be out there helping them move along their way. I'd love to see us have a training curriculum for for the leaders of these groups on training on mediation, training on all kinds of different skills. I'd love to see in 25 years that we have an annual report on reconciliation based on indicators, and that we have discussions around that report every year that says, okay, well, we've made good progress on this, but not on this. How does that maybe realign our resources? And I think partnerships. I think OTC is not going to do all this by ourselves. That's for sure. We want to have as many people working with us, as many organizations as we can working with us as we can.
The logic model, is there a plan to release that publicly? Is there kind of a date that you're hoping for?
Like a politician, I'm not going to say a date here. Don't want to have to stand on it.
Is that the plan to have that be available?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because we kind of go back and forth. Like I feel like that big complicated thing is a mess. And like I work in this every day, and it takes me, like, where is this kid? Is there? Who's there? And, like it seems like really complicated, but at the same time, I'm understanding that certain people love that and they like it and stuff. So whereas I gravitate more to the sort of the big picture, the tree and kind of understanding it more that way. But so I think we're part of what we gotta get something done and down, and then I think we're gonna need to consult it again a whole bunch more and talk to as many people as we can to say where are we right, where are we wrong. And then we also need to work on how do we communicate it in different ways. So I think, yeah, eventually we'd like to get it public. And then that would be part of the getting feedback on it.
Okay, Rhett, excuse me, we have Okay, my apologies for the last one. So we have a question here.
Hello, Brett. I honor the work you're doing, and I hear what you're saying, that you're working at below the political level. But I just wonder whether your office has got any uptake or any dialogue with, for instance, the provincial cabinet. Like our provincial leader just made a speech outlining the plan for the next 10 years, I think, of the province. And I don't know if there's much dovetailing in with the work that you're doing in the community, and I think that doesn't give me as much hope as I would like, and I just wondered whether they're paying attention to what you're doing, and whether you have a presence with the provincial cabinet, for instance, or any of the even below that level at the deputy minister level. Just so that is taken into account when those people are making their plans for the province.
Well, I can tell you that the province funded some of this work. So we got some money, $45,000 to hire some of the team that's been working on this stuff now. Twice we've got money from them. So $90,000 from them to work on this stuff. So they've been supported in that way. We've talked to them about seeing if they can support us in a bigger way. So far, no go, but I don't deal with anybody at the cabinet level. I think our tree commissioner does some of that. So to be honest, I couldn't tell you where things are at the political level. We would certainly welcome more provincial involvement.
Any final questions? If not, I just want to thank, on behalf of everyone here and in Regina, thank you very much for coming and talking to us. I don't know whether this is what you expected. I think we were just entertained, if I can put it that way, to an hour and a half of this is policy making in its sort of gory detail. It is about making small steps. It is about pushing systems. It is about doing all of this, and all of us trying to find our place in this. And as a little microcosm of other policy issues, this was really, I think, an amazing trip through to give people a sense of just this set of challenging, very, very challenging issues, and how you go about navigating them, and how you go about meeting various people's expectations, so that you keep everybody in play. And it seems to me that discussion that we were having here today, you take that and you just blow it up, and that is this reconciliation issue for the next 25 years to take us out to the point that you were looking at. So thank you very much for taking the time to do this. I can see that your background before you came to this job is going to stand you in very good stead. So let's thank Rhett for a wonderful presentation.